Well, as we discussed in our first session, there are multiple reasons why we as Christians can and should learn how to defend our faith and how to give good answers to those around us. The conditions of our culture. It demands Christians that really have a good mind about them and that can reach into the world and bridge the gap of understanding. Also, our commands. We've been commanded in Scripture to be those types of disciples and Christians who have answers and can lead people to faith in Jesus, helping them overcome intellectual obstacles. Also, our Christ, because Jesus himself, he used apologetics and evidence himself, but then also our common sense. I almost forgot what that was. I must not have a lot of common sense. Our common sense, because we should be able to get down to the level of where people are at, speak their language, find common ground, and relate to them. And so let's get into the first section, really. The other thing that we just covered was kind of an introductory section. This really now is where we're going to get into the first of 10 areas of evidence. So the first 4 things we want to share with you, we'll do 1 tonight and then 3 tomorrow morning, are arguments for the existence of God. The thing that you have to really understand about us as human beings is because we are thinking, rational human beings, we ask ourselves deep and meaningful questions throughout our lives. We ask ourselves questions of origin. Where did I come from? We ask ourselves questions of meaning. What is the purpose of life? We ask ourselves questions of morality. Is there even such a thing as right and wrong? And as humans, we also ask ourselves questions about our destiny. Where will I go when I die? But beyond all of these questions, there lies still a deeper and a more fundamental question. It's a question that is going to answer all those other questions. This is a question that it's going to really influence everything in your life, and this is a question that to a large degree is going to impact where you spend eternity for the rest of your existence. The question of God's existence is vitally, vitally important for us. Now, something that you have to understand is that if God does not exist, it really is going to impact your life in a tremendous number of ways. If God doesn't exist, then life is ultimately meaningless. You have to understand that. If there is no God, then essentially everything and anything that humanity accomplishes is meaningless and worthless. It doesn't matter if you find the cure for cancer. It doesn't matter if you find the cure for AIDS. There is no God. There is no eternal life. So ultimately, in the large scope, that is a meaningless accomplishment. If there is no God, things are meaningless. If there is no God, if God does not exist, life is ultimately without any value. You see, if there is no God, and if we're all products of random chance and evolution, listen, pigs, primates, and people are all of the same value. This is why, to a worldview of atheism and of evolution, abortion really is no problem. To many people like Hitler or Mussolini, mass genocide and murder, it's really just a question of survival. So if God does not exist, then life is ultimately without meaning or value. And thirdly, if God does not exist, listen, life is ultimately without hope. There is no ultimate hope. You might be able to find temporary hope, but there is no ultimate hope if God does not exist. In the face of evil, disease, suffering, and death, if God does not exist, there is no hope in any of these realms. And so it's something very important that we have to think about. Now, this goes to show us, listen, the tremendous importance of answering this question. Since that is true, that if God does not exist, that life is meaningless, without value, and without ultimate hope, it goes to show us the tremendous importance of answering this question. This is one of the central questions in life. Does God exist? I really do think it is the number one most important question that any human being can answer. The second most important question is this: what type of God exists? And we're going to help you with both of those questions. Does God exist, and what type of God exists? However, listen, if God does indeed exist, then all of these things change. Life can be filled with meaning, value, purpose, and hope if God exists. So, of course, the essential thing to discover is, does he exist? Is that indeed true? It's not really an issue of subjective feeling. This is something that a human being, a rational person, can discover to be true or not true. So that's, of course, what we're going to be doing here at Firewall. We're going to help you train you on how to answer this question in 4 different ways using 4 different types of evidence. And you know why we're going to do this? Because this is one of many, many things that pastors are supposed to do. Many of you may not know that, but if you read Ephesians chapter 4, the purpose that Paul the Apostle says that church leadership has been given is to train and prepare and equip the saints for the work of the ministry so that they can go out into the world and preach the gospel, so that they can go out into the world and expand the kingdom. So that involves preparing them and teaching them and training them on how to pray, how to serve, how to love, but also this, in preparing you how to have good answers, to defend your faith, and even to share your faith. And you know how we're going to do this, guys? We are going to show you how to do this, these 4 different arguments for God's existence. We're going to show you how to do this without using your Bible. Now, to some of you, that's going to make you feel strange right off the bat. And to some of you, that might even sound nearly blasphemous. But there's a good reason why we're doing this. There's a good reason for it. First of all, unbelievers, as many of you all know, they don't respect the Bible. They don't receive the Bible. Paul even told us this in 1 Corinthians 2:14. He said, the natural man does not apprehend the things of the Spirit. This is why, you expect a big result when you quote John 3:16 to people, or you share the gospel, and nothing happens because the natural man does not perceive the things of the Spirit. But remember Paul the Apostle, remember the model he set for us? If you're speaking to a Greek, well, you should speak in Greek. Don't speak in Hebrew. In other words, if you're speaking to a non-biblical person, they don't know the Bible, they don't respect the Bible, they don't believe the Bible, why would you go and use the Bible? Later on, yes, but initially, we are going to do what Jesus did and what Paul did and what many other people have done, and we are going to use something that the unbelieving person already believes in, the natural world around them. And we're going to show you how to look in the world around you and grab onto certain things in the world and then show it to someone and say, see, this is evidence of God's existence. And the second reason we're going to teach you to do this without using the Bible is that unbelievers need us to speak their language. Remember what Paul said? I become all things to all men that I might by all means save some. We want to find common ground with these people, and these arguments are going to help you do precisely that. Now listen, God knows this. God knows this about unbelievers, and He has left us mountains of evidence to help us reach them. Many of you may be unaware of that, but at Firewall, that's what we're going to help you understand. The mountains of evidence that God has left at your disposal. David wrote about it in Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. But we're going to show you how it does that. We're going to show you how to latch on to what the Bible has told you and display it to a person so that they can see it as the handiwork of God. Because as of now, they do not. Paul told us in Romans chapter 1, he said that we can tell from the things that are made that God exists and that He's all-powerful. Paul told us that in Romans 1:18 through 20. Paul told us that the evidence of that was so powerful that the pagan person, the unbeliever, is without excuse. And so that's how we're going to do it without the Bible. Now later, once that they establish belief, once they understand that belief in God is reasonable, then you know what we're going to do? Tomorrow, we're going to show you how to help them understand that the Old and New Testament are 100% trustworthy in history, in archaeology, and prophecy, and other ways. But first things first, you have to meet people where they're at, speak their language, and we're going to help you do that. You know, God has given us 2 books to help us speak to the world. You may not have ever heard this before, but about a century ago, pastors and preachers, they would always talk about this, the 2 books that God has given to us, the 2 books through which God speaks to the world. The first book, well, you're holding it in your hands, it's His Word. But the second book that many people are unaware of is not just His Word, but His world. God speaks to us through the natural creation, but also through His written word. Those are the 2 books. Or you could even put it like this. God has revealed Himself to us Number one, through his revelation, and number two, through our reason. In other words, you can know that the one true God exists by coming to him through reading his revelation, the Word of God, or by using your reason, and you can discover his fingerprints, his signature out in the world. And so that's the purpose of this evidence. Now, before we get into these arguments, again, I'm going to give you one tonight, and then tomorrow morning, 3 more. Before we get into using these arguments, I need you to know something, and I need you to write this down, or at least just take good note of this. A good argument needs to have certain qualities, okay? Now, when I say argument, I don't mean that you should be argumentative. Argument simply means a line of reasoning, a line of thinking. But there are 4 qualities that a good argument needs to have for it to be true, to be powerful, to be effective. Okay, number 1. The arguments that we're going to use, and any others that you might use in the future, number 1, they need to be veridical. In other words, the premises of the argument, the sentences, they need to be true. I know that sounds really basic, but this is how you defeat an argument, is you try to find a mistake in the premise. And so, as we give you these arguments for God's existence, all of the premises need to be true. That's one of the qualities of a good argument. Number 2, they don't just need to be veridical. A good argument needs to be logical. In other words, all the premises need to follow the rules of logic. There are 12 rules of logic. And anytime an atheist comes to you and he tells you something like this, the universe created itself, you can just go, you just violated the laws of logic. That's unrealistic. That can't happen, and that's a bad argument. So it has to follow the rules of logic. Why? Because the rules of logic are the rules of reality. So make sure that your arguments never violate the rules of logic, but if you can find out where an unbeliever's arguments do, then that's a good talking point. So number 1, they need to be veridical. Number 2, they should be logical. And number 3, it should be knowable. It should be knowable. In other words, the premises of your argument, they can be known. They can be discovered by people. It's no use saying something that nobody knows about. It's no use using something as a premise if it's undiscoverable. So it just has to be known, has to be discoverable by people. And number 4, this is very important. Number 4, your argument needs to be plausible. Okay? This is very important, and what I mean by plausibility is this. This is very important for you to remember. Your conclusion of your argument needs to be more probable than the negation. In other words, have you ever heard somebody say, you can't prove God exists? And I say, well, it depends on what you mean by the word prove. If what you mean by the word prove is if I can show you that it's more plausible to believe that God exists than that he doesn't exist, I absolutely can prove to you that God exists. In other words, if you want to think of it like a percentage, all we're aiming for is a 51% plausibility. Do you understand? Now, I believe that the percentage is actually much stronger than that, but listen, don't set your goals too high. You don't have to prove to people 99.9% that God exists. No, don't aim that high. All you have to prove to a reasonable person is that it is more likely, or much more likely, that God exists than that he does not. And that's what you call plausibility. Okay, and so those are 4 things that a good argument has. It should be veridical, the premises are true, logical, the premises follow the rules of logic, it should be knowable, the premises can be known, and fourthly, your argument needs to be plausible. The conclusion is more probable than its negation. The very first argument we're going to share with you tonight is the cosmological argument. And this is an argument that demonstrates God's existence by looking at the beginning of the universe. And to kind of ease our way into this argument, we're going to show you a video on this to kind of get you ready for it.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
All right, so that, ladies and gentlemen, those 25 words are called the cosmological argument, and we're going to teach them to you. They're in your notes, but it's so very simple. 2 premises and a conclusion. Step number 1, as you can see, everything that begins to exist, it has a cause. Step number 2, the universe began to exist. And step number 3, therefore the universe must have a cause. And we believe that that cause, it has to be God. Now listen, the power of this argument is the cosmological argument, though it takes many different forms. This is an argument that uses science. Now listen, is science something that is being talked about a lot in today's world? Is science a thing that many people are interested in? Is science something that people give much authority to in their minds and in their lives? Absolutely. So if you can take something that somebody loves and respects and is open to in their life, and if you can show that the very thing that they love and adore points in the direction of God, that's a very effective way to witness to somebody. So let's just go through this step by step. First of all, we're going to look at the first premise, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now, again, remember what I said, that one of the ways that you defeat an argument is by trying to find a mistake in the premise. If you can find any premises that are untrue or have mistakes, the argument falls apart. However, if the premises are true, then the argument is airtight. It's logical, and you cannot avoid it. So let's think about this. Is that true that everything that begins to exist has a cause? Does that sound logical or rational to you? I think the first reason that we would say yes to that is because that is our common experience. In other words, as you've gone through your life, however old that you may be, everything that you know of that had a beginning, that had a point of origin, everything you know of like that, well, it had a cause. The chair that you're sitting on, the car that you're driving, you yourself, the apple that you ate at lunch today, everything in your common experience tells you in this world that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Your common experience, which is usually a very reliable indicator, even for things like this, it tells you that that premise is true. Or let's flip that around. Think of it like this. Have you ever been walking down the street, just on your way to lunch with a friend, and all of a sudden, poof, a tiger pops out of nowhere in the middle of the street? When was the last time that happened to you? It's never happened to you. When was the last time you were driving down the road and all of a sudden, poof, an elephant is standing right there in the freeway? That's the stuff of movies. That's the stuff of magic or science fiction. But yet, that's what people want you to believe about the universe. That's what people want you to believe about molecules and energy and such. But listen, your common experience, which is a good, reliable indicator, it tells us that that first premise is true, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Our common experience supports that. The atheist will then say, ha-ha, but what about God? I got you, Christian. What about God? And you say, my friend, read it again. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. God has no beginning. There is no cause for God. God has an explanation of why he exists, but he has no cause. God is existence. So that first premise, it doesn't apply to God. Many atheists misunderstand it. Everything that begins to exist, if it has a beginning, it has to have a cause. Our common experience proves that. Number two, there's a law of logic that supports this. This is called the law of causality. The law of causality. And I don't know how much more plainly to put it to you than this, that there is a law of human experience, a law of thinking that says that if something begins to exist, it must have a cause. If there is an effect, it must first have a cause. This is something that is so undergirded by human experience, it is a law of logic. Now, that should tell you something. Again, when somebody goes against this premise and goes against this idea, they are actually violating one of the laws of logic, the law of causality. The law of causality says that something that begins to exist has to have a cause. So one of the atheists that I showed you earlier, the guy that looks like Santa Claus with a big white beard, his name is Daniel Dennett. He is a philosophy professor. That's what he gets paid to teach. He actually teaches people that the universe caused itself. Now, Stephen Hawking, he believes that too. And, Stephen Hawking's excuse, the excuse that I give him, is that he doesn't know anything about philosophy. Do you know why? Because he might be a genius in some areas of mathematics, but not in philosophy. And so that's kind of the slack that I would give to Stephen Hawking for not understanding this. Because in the realm of philosophy, Stephen Hawking is a fool. But Daniel Dennett, he has a little bit better responsibility. He teaches philosophy, but yet he is teaching his students, and in his written work, a violation of the law of logic, the law of causality. Do you know what would have to be the case for something to cause itself? That would mean that you would have to exist before you existed in order to bring yourself into existence. Is that even possible? No, it's foolishness. So listen, the law of causality, it also supports the truth of that idea, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. But do you know another reason that supports premise one? Scientific investigation. Science, this enterprise that is pretty new and that everybody loves today. Essentially, in today's university, a scientist who wears a white lab coat, he might as well be a high priest. He might as well be, a high priest that has his robes of science on, and people bow down and worship before his declarations. This is how highly scientists are exalted today. But it's good for you to understand as a Christian that science is the friend of faith. As a matter of fact, they're best friends. Did you know that the vast majority of the founding fathers of the modern scientific movement are Christians? Did you know that? Sir Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, James Clerk Maxwell, Michael Faraday, and even Albert Einstein. Though Einstein wasn't a Christian, did you know that Einstein believed in a creator and a God? But they'll never tell you that. But my point is this, scientific investigation, it supports that idea that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Do you know why? Because isn't science really the search for causes? Essentially, science, whether it's immunology, whether it's microbiology, whether it's forensic science that detectives might use, in many, many areas, archaeology and so forth, science is essentially the search for causes. Why? Based upon the truth of this premise. And so listen, you tell your atheist friend, if you want to deny the truth of that premise, then you are going to cripple science. You're going to cripple scientific investigation, because scientific investigation, it stands or falls on the truth of that premise, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. So listen, based upon that, we are well within our intellectual rights. You're well within your reason to believe that that first idea is true. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Let's move on to the second premise. And this really is the beautiful one, the powerful one for this argument. The first idea is what you call a metaphysical principle. It's not something that has to do with physical stuff necessarily. The first premise is a metaphysical principle. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. But number two, this is a physical principle, a physical truth. The universe began to exist. Now, many of you may kind of know that, but what you probably don't realize as a Christian is that that is a tremendous piece of ammunition to have in your life. If you know that the universe began to exist, and if you know how to help someone else understand that there is scientific evidence for that, since we know that everything that began to exist has a cause, and if you can help them understand the universe began to exist, then what's the conclusion? The universe must have a cause. So the universe began to exist. Now, the reason why it's important for us to know this and present this to other people is because this is revolutionary. You may not be aware of this, but it is a revolutionary idea, and to many scientists, a frustrating and an infuriating idea that the universe began to exist, that the universe had a beginning. Do you know why? Because ever since maybe 500-600 BC, many thinkers, Aristotle, other people, modern-day scientists, they have all believed up until the early 1900s that the universe was eternal. And the reason why that's important is because when a person who believed in God would talk to people about the universe, these people would answer and say, the universe simply exists. There is no cause, no explanation. It is just eternal. It's just there. Punto, se acabó. And they would think that that would get them off of the hook. But the remarkable discovery, listen, in the 20th century and now in the 21st century, we have scientific evidence that the universe began to exist. Hey, listen, you may not be a person of science. That may not be a tremendous area of interest for you. But if you are interested in being a good Christian witness, this is one of the best things you can help your kids understand and your coworkers, is that we have scientific evidence in at least 5 different areas that the universe began to exist in a definite moment of time. So I'm going to show those to you right now. And they're very easy to remember. If you can remember the word fresh, F-R-E-S-H, you can remember these 5 scientific evidences. And this can help you have a fresh appreciation of science. It can help your friends have a fresh understanding about God, perhaps. Okay, the first one, the F in this acronym, are what I call famous equations. Famous equations. In other words, E equals mc squared and what I call the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. Now, these are famous equations that virtually everybody knows. Now, you know who Albert Einstein is, right? He's the guy with the white hair, the cool hairdo, the guy on the left. Albert Einstein. Now, one of the amazing things about his discovery of the general theory of relativity, you know it as E equals mc squared. This is probably the most famous equation, perhaps in world history, certainly one of the most well-known. Now, what that means, E equals mc squared, is energy, the energy of a particle, the energy of something is equal to mass times the speed of something squared. And what that means is that there's a tremendous amount of energy coiled up inside of an atom. And so therefore they took Einstein's equations and what did they discover? Atomic fission, right? When you split an atom, a tremendous amount of energy is unleashed. Why? Because E equals mc squared is true. So in 1915, when Albert Einstein discovered his general theory of relativity, many things happened, but listen, one of the things that we discovered that he learned from his equations, and it was something that he didn't like. It was something that Albert Einstein actually tried to change, is that it meant the universe had a point of beginning. E equals mc squared shows us that the universe had a point of beginning in the finite past. The universe has not been here forever. The universe has not been here for eternity. Another famous equation that shows us this, and this is one that you really want to remember because many people don't know about it, is the BGV theorem. BGV stands for Born, Guth, and Vilenkin. Now this gentleman right here that you see, his name is Alexander Vilenkin. He is not a Christian. He doesn't even believe in God. But yet he is a cosmologist, and in 2003, as you saw in that video, this gentleman with Arvin Bohr and Alan Guth, in 2003, they developed the BGV theorem. Listen, that any universe that is in a state of expansion must have a beginning. That's how simple it is. I don't know how to write the BGV theorem. I'm not good at math. That's okay. I don't have to be. Neither do you. This is good, right? Even if the multiverse exists. Now, I don't believe the multiverse does exist because there's no scientific evidence for that, nor really could there ever be. But even if you talk to an atheist who does believe in the multiverse, the BGV theorem also applies to it. So I just want you to know that. There are 2 famous mathematical equations that show us the universe had a beginning. And just so you know, listen, Albert Einstein is called the father of modern physics. He changed everything. Before him, it was Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, a born-again Christian, who wrote a commentary on the book of Revelation, one of the smartest men to ever walk the face of the earth. He was the father of Newtonian physics, but Einstein was the father of, well, modern physics, they say. Einstein helped us understand the small, while Newton helped us understand the large, planetary mechanics and all of that. But Einstein is revered. Number 1, he believed in God. And number 2, his equation of E equals mc squared points us to God because it shows us the universe had a beginning. And so does the BGV theorem as well. So that's the F, famous equations. That's not too hard to understand, right? Number 2, the ripples of matter in deep space. In 1980, they launched a satellite, and this was the COBE satellite, the Cosmic Background Explorer. And basically what happened was this, is that based on the theory of the Big Bang, which is the standard model, and I'll be honest with you, most of it I absolutely agree with. Many a Christian walks around saying there's no evidence for the Big Bang. That's not true. They say it's against the Bible. Not necessarily. It depends on how you look at that. I'm not saying I believe everything the Big Bang teaches because I absolutely don't, but the scientific evidence that undergirds the theory of the Big Bang is undeniable. It proves we had a point of cosmic beginning, and that is in the Bible, right? So all I'm saying is this, is that based upon that theory of the Big Bang, it's called the Standard Model, they launched this satellite into space in 1980. And what the COBE satellite was tasked with doing was finding hardcore physical evidence of deep space matter that they predicted would be in certain types of shapes and formations if the equations of the Big Bang were true. And you know what they found? Exactly what they predicted. The COBE, the Cosmic Background Explorer, it found these huge, gigantic ripples of deep space matter and energy, just as was predicted by the Standard Model. And so you can use that. Based upon the discoveries of the COBE satellite, those ripples of deep space matter and energy are empirical verification of this idea that our universe has a point of beginning. And that's useful to you. So the famous equations, the R is for the ripples of matter. The E in this word fresh, the E is for expanding universe. The expanding universe. Now, as the video showed you, in 1915, that is where Albert Einstein, 1915, he made his discovery of the general theory of relativity. In the years to come, other mathematicians, Alexander Friedmann and Georges Lemaitre, they did these mathematical calculations where they also supported his belief. Based upon his equations, their mathematical equations pointed to the fact that not only did the universe have a beginning, but that it was expanding. But nobody really knew if that was true or not until 1929. There was a man named Edwin Hubble. Edwin Hubble, you may have heard of him, the Hubble Deep Space Telescope. It's named in honor of this great astronomer of American history. And in 1929, at the Mount Wilson Observatory, Edwin Hubble noticed something. He noticed that light from distant galaxies, as he was looking through his telescope, it was redshifted. And all you need to understand is that he deduced from that, based on his knowledge as an astronomer in mathematics, that the galaxies he was looking at and the stars he was looking at through his telescope were moving away from each other. That the universe was expanding. In other words, listen, Edwin Hubble discovered visual, empirical evidence of Albert Einstein's equations and the other gentleman's mathematical equations. He discovered hardcore scientific evidence of the fact that the universe is expanding away from a point of common origin. So this is how it works. If the universe is expanding, what if, like a video, if you stopped it and ran it in reverse, what would happen? It would come back together, smaller, smaller, and smaller, until what? Until the point of origin. And that's where the universe began. Edwin Hubble in 1929 at the Mount Wilson Observatory, and he even invited Albert Einstein to the Mount Wilson Observatory to see exactly what he saw. He discovered verification of what Einstein said. So that is the E, the expanding universe. If the universe is expanding, that means it's expanding away from one point of origin, and that means it had a beginning. We have three areas of great scientific ammunition up until this point. Famous equations, ripples of deep space matter and energy, the expanding universe, and number 4, the second law. This is the second law of thermodynamics. Now, the second law of thermodynamics, you're very used to it. When you go out into the world and you buy pizza, and you leave your pizza out for a certain amount of time, when you come back to the table an hour later, is it hotter or is it colder than when you left it? It's colder. And your teenage son doesn't care and he eats it anyway, right? So the law of entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics, it tells us that in a closed system, that the amount of useful energy, it decreases. That closed state, it will tend towards a state of equilibrium. Or to put it in layman's terms, listen, the universe is running down. Everything is going from a state of high order to low order. The universe is moving from organization into disorganization, just like your teenager's bedroom, right? And that's how the universe is. Things are aging. Things are dying out. Stars are losing their energy. This is the second law of thermodynamics. It is a law. And so what we know is this. Listen, if the universe was eternal, if the universe had been here for an infinite amount of time, think about this, how much heat would be left in the universe? Okay, let me ask you again. If the universe had been here for an eternity of time, and it's been running down, how much energy would be left if it had already been here for an eternity? None. None. It's like this. When you walk into your house, if you lit a candle before you left, and you come back home, and there's only about this much left, it shows you the candle hasn't been burning forever. The candle has only been burning for, well, however long you were gone for, because there's some wax left. If a car is running on E in terms of its gas tank, you know that that car hasn't been left on forever, because if the car had been running forever, how much gas would be left in the tank? Nothing. But the universe still has heat. The universe still has energy. And the universe is running down, but we're not all the way there yet. We haven't experienced heat death yet. So guess what that means? We've only been here for a limited amount of time. And this is how in the ancient days, in the ancient world, before science, this is how philosophers proved that the universe hasn't been here for an eternity of time. But now, since we have science, we can verify it with scientific discovery. The second law of thermodynamics, the universe is running down, but what that means is that it must have had a point of beginning, because otherwise the universe would already be dead, and we would already experienced a heat death. And so the second law is very useful to us. It shows us the universe had a point of beginning, and since then, it's deteriorating. Are you with me so far? So fresh. Famous equations, ripples of deep space matter and energy, the expanding universe, and the second law of thermodynamics, they all point us powerfully, scientifically to the fact, the proven fact that the universe had a beginning. And lastly, the H in fresh is for heat radiation echo. Heat radiation echo. Now, this was discovered in 1965 by Arno Penzias and Bruce Wilson at the Bell Labs in New Jersey. And the story is actually quite humorous. They were pointing their radio telescopes towards the heavens, and no matter where they pointed them, they were getting a certain reading, a certain heat reading back from their instruments. And they thought that their instruments were messed up. They actually thought, because they were in New Jersey, that pigeons had pooped all over their radars. And so they actually called for the technicians to come in and clean their devices, because they thought, surely they must be wrong. But to their surprise, their instruments were not wrong. And in 1965, Arno Penzias and Bruce Wilson, they discovered what is called this microwave heat echo of the universe. And what this is, ladies and gentlemen, is the heat that is left over from the beginning cosmic explosion when our universe came into being. I don't believe it was random. I don't believe that it was out of order. I believe that it was purposeful and it was measured and there was an intelligence behind it. But nonetheless, this is empirical scientific evidence that there was a hot, explosive beginning of our universe, and it was captured in 1965 by these gentlemen. And they won the Nobel Prize for this in science. So again, this all points back to an event of a beginning with your friends. Do you understand? As you talk with your friends, you can say, listen, in 1965, they discovered the heat radiation echo, the remnant leftover heat, the smoking gun of when the universe came into existence. So do you follow me thus far? And these are 5 different areas of absolutely proven scientific fact that show us the universe began to exist. That second premise in this cosmological argument is true. How do you know it's true? Because of science, my friend. You can say, I love science. I worship the God of science, the one who made the universe. And he has helped us discover in the 20th and 21st century hardcore scientific proof and evidence that the universe began to exist. The famous equations, the ripples of deep space matter and energy, the expanding universe, the second law of thermodynamics, and the heat radiation echo. So as we return now to our argument, we understand that we can believe premise number 1 and premise number 2. We know that everything that begins to exist has a cause. We also know that the universe began to exist, and that brings us then to our conclusion. If the two premises are true, so is the conclusion. And what is the conclusion? Therefore, the universe must have a cause. If there is no error in the first two premises, the conclusion follows logically. It is inescapable. It's an airtight argument. The universe must have a cause. Now, here's the thing that we have to consider. If something caused the universe, and when we say the universe, what we mean is this: all time, all space, all matter, and all energy. And if you're talking to someone that believes in the multiverse, even though I don't think it exists at all, you can just say, hey, the multiverse sprang into existence. You understand? So here's the deep question, and we're almost done. Listen, what kind of a being would it be to be the cause of the universe? What kind of a being, what kind of a cause would it be like who could create all time, all space, all matter, and all energy? Well, let's kind of draw a character profile as you bring this to a close. Well, if this cause created the universe, it would have to be beyond the universe, correct? And that's what we call transcendent. This cause would have to be transcendent or apart from the universe. Furthermore, since this cause created all time, because time is a created thing and time is a part of the universe, the cause would have to be what? Timeless. Since it created all time, it would have to be timeless. Thirdly, since the cause created all space, it would have to be spaceless. This is an interesting character profile. Whoever or whatever it is that caused the universe to spring into existence is transcendent, is timeless, is spaceless. Fourthly, since this cause is the explanation, the beginning of all the material in the universe, then the cause itself would have to be immaterial, correct? Immaterial, non-physical. If this cause is, well, the cause for everything else, it would have to be uncaused. You follow me? It would have to be uncaused, immaterial, spaceless, timeless, transcendent. If this cause of the universe, if this is the reason, if this is the being that created all of the atoms, all of the energy, all of the stars and the quasars and the pulsars, all of the incredible energy in our universe or beyond, that cause would have to be unimaginably powerful, wouldn't it? Yeah. Unimaginably powerful. And finally, listen, the cause would have to be transcendent, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, uncaused, unimaginably powerful. But lastly, listen, since the universe began at a certain moment, the cause behind the universe would also have to be a person, would also have to be a personal mind. Why? Because an effect, if it doesn't exist forever, if it has a point of beginning, then a decision must have been made to begin that effect. Do you understand? And the only things that can make decisions and choices are who? Personal beings. Do you understand? Natural law and things like that, they can't make decisions or choices. But since the universe began at a certain particular moment, that shows there was a decision made, a choice. And so therefore, it would have to be a personal mind. Because only a mind doesn't have a body, is immaterial and non-physical. Do you understand? So let me read this to you again. If the universe has to have a cause, the cause of the universe must be transcendent because it's apart from the universe, must be timeless because it created all time, must be spaceless because it created all space, must be immaterial because it created all material, it must be uncaused because it's the cause of everything, it must be unimaginably powerful to have created all the energy, and it must be a personal mind who made a decision to begin the universe. And ladies and gentlemen, that cause is God. And the remarkable thing that we discover is this. Listen, that the God of revelation is the God of reason. You understand? Because if you want to learn about that cause of the universe, all you have to do is read the Bible. Because he is described in the scriptures. That is not the God of Hinduism. That is not the God of Buddhism. This is not the God of Zen. There are only 3 world religions that are even possibly in the ballpark of this cause. Do you understand? So you could learn about him through revelation, but listen, even if you never read the Bible, even if you don't believe the Bible, you can come to the awareness of this cause behind the universe through reason. Through reason, we have discovered that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe must have a cause, and all of his qualities show that he must be God. So the God of revelation of the Bible is the God of reason. Make sense? And that is the cosmological argument. Using science, using the beginning of the universe to help someone come to an understanding that is very reasonable and even scientific to believe that God exists.